Let me just start with a text. I don't know if it's cool to be reading texts that people have sent you, but so Dave sends me a text a couple of weeks ago. He's like, "You're scheduled to teach on November 5th," and I didn't answer him because I wasn't sure if he was just telling me or he was checking with me. But I never answered him, and I forgot. So anyway, Monday he sends me another text. He goes, "So you are teaching on Sunday, yes?" So I said, "Yes." He goes, "Thanks." I said, "Unless I chicken out." He goes, "That doesn't sound like you." I said, "It's the teaching on courage," which I thought was kind of funny. But he goes, "Oh, I'll tell JJ." And by the way, that was funny. So, but my point was, he was very encouraging. I was kind of playing with him, but he encouraged me. So, never underestimate, even a text can be very encouraging, Dave. So, tissues. Thanks. I thought I was doing pretty good, and I woke up 4 o'clock this morning. Oh, actually, before I forget, today is my anniversary, which I share with my wife. So, we've celebrated 34 years of bliss together. At least I have. But I woke up this morning, it was daylight savings time. I woke up like 4 o'clock, and I thought, this teaching is absolutely terrible. There's no way I can do this. It's just not right. And I thought back to my text about how I was going to chicken out, and I really felt like I was going to chicken out, like I don't know what to do. So anyway, I said, I'm going back to sleep. So I went back to sleep, and I woke up. I felt better about it. And then, God, always being faithful to me that He is, I know. Nate read a scripture that I've got in my teaching. So I thought, okay, obviously, I might be close to listening to God. So anyway, the teaching is calling all men. And a couple of caveats. I might go longer than 20 minutes, so if anybody can't deal with that, you should really go now, because I'm saving all the good stuff for the end, so you got to put through it. And the other thing is I might offend someone, and not intentionally, but it's always possible. But I'm going to include a lot of quotes today, so my first quote I'm going to start with is from Frank Carl. And Frank's quote, actually he's teaching today. His quote is, where is it? Sometimes you have to bump the cup to see what's in it. And I thought, that is a great quote. Sometimes you bump someone's cup and it spills over, you see what dribbles out. So if I offend you, might be my fault, but take the time to see why you reacted the way you did, because it also says something about you. So I think it's really good to be introspective. Keep that in mind today. So, calling all men, it's really about manliness, masculinity, whatever. And I just saw a news article that said they're teaching at colleges, usually high-end, really expensive private colleges, they're teaching this course, Toxic Masculinity. I'm thinking, oh boy. Like masculinity is good. How could it be toxic, right? And masculinity is bad for the culture, bad for people, bad for whatever. I'm thinking, I don't agree with this. So I started reading some of the and when they're talking about Harvey Weinstein and how they're using him as an example as being toxic masculinity. And a guy wrote a quote about the article. He said, "There's nothing masculine about Harvey Weinstein. He's a rapist." He's not masculine, he's a rapist. Let's separate the two, because there's masculinity is good. So we find that one man's bad behavior is like casting a pall on all men. So hopefully I'll encourage the men here. Let's set an example that when people see your masculinity, it's a positive thing. So what does it mean to be a man, acting like a man? And culture, I find, has changed. So is culture right or wrong? Is the current culture good? If it changes, is it bad? Is it better? How do we know? And really, we have to look at the Bible. But first, I want to show you some culture and how it has changed. So can you bring up my first picture? So this is a picture of JFK, John F. Kennedy. So this is John F. Kennedy on the presidential sailboat, okay? And I think the common term is he's looking like a boss here. Because, I mean, you can't get any cooler than that. He's sailing a 62-foot, it's a catch rig, actually. It's a two-masted thing, which is a little bit harder than a regular sailboat. He's got the Wayfarer sunglasses on. He's at the helm. I mean, it doesn't get any cooler than that, right? Now let's go to the next picture. This is the other JFK, John Kerry. So one guy became president. This guy ran for president. Draw your own conclusions. And then let's go to the last one. Pajama boy, as they called him. I'm thinking to myself, if you just look at the pictures, you can see that masculinity is kind of waning, okay? So, John F. Kennedy was a war hero. And what happened was he drove this thing called a PT-109. It was a patrol torpedo boat, right? And what they basically did was, he was in the South Pacific. They drove these boats around. They were like 80-foot boats with, I think, 1,500 horsepower motors. They were really powerful. They went fast. They had torpedoes on them, and their job was to shoot torpedoes at other things, right? So his boat got run over by a Japanese boat, cut in half. The men were in burning, all this gas was on the water's fire. John Kennedy was the leader of the boat. One guy was badly burned. He had his life vest on. He took the guy's life vest strap in his mouth, and he swam a couple of miles pulling this guy to shore with the other guys on the boat. And then they were hiding out from the Japanese. He swam 2 miles to another island to try to find food, 2 miles back, and then a couple miles another way. So this guy was like a real war hero, right? And people said to him, wow, what's it like being a war hero? And he was like, well, or how'd you become a war hero? He goes, well, it wasn't my choice. Somebody cut my boat in half. So he was kind of, humble about it. And then John F. Kerry, you heard about him and the swift boat thing. He got a bunch of Purple Hearts, and he got one, and they treated his wound with bacitracin. Okay, and another one he got a couple stitches, and the third one was a contusion. I'm thinking, if you're talking war hero, who's the war hero here? You know what I mean? It's just like our culture is accepted less and less from men and elevated to the point. So let's see what Scripture has to say. Let's put culture aside, because I think culture is not quite up to speed here. So the Scripture, Genesis 1:26, it says, God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. He created them male and female and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. Now, if you remember, Corey was here a couple weeks, months, I can't remember, recently. And she talked about family resemblance. And she had her family stand up, and you could see a resemblance in the family, right? So what I'm saying is, as I look at this, God created us in his likeness. As men, you are created in God's image. Now, it may not be the physical resemblance, but it's the character resemblance. So men have to realize, and women have to recognize, that men have been created in God's image. And there's a character there we may have to develop, but it's there. Right? The DNA is there. We have to recognize that and live up to it. And I think when you look at some of these pictures, you're like, oh, which one do you want to identify with? Do you want to be the JFK of the World War II, or you want to be the guy who sits in his onesie pajamas and drinks hot chocolate and thinks deep thoughts or whatever? So now there's a distinction between men and women. And this is where I may get into trouble, but I'm quoting other people during my whole talk, so I really can't get in too much trouble. So in this case, I'm going to quote God's word, so if you have an issue, don't take it with me. And this is from Ephesians 5. It says, verse 23, "For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loves the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body, just as Christ does the church, for we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, and I'm talking about Christ and his church. However, each of you must also love his wife as he loves himself." So the thing there is God has established an order. And current culture really is not into that. Like sometimes you can get into trouble for holding a door open for a woman because they feel like you're treating them as lesser, or so. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I just know it happens. I'm thinking, I don't understand. I don't see how you can perceive that. But the same thing, God says, Jesus is the head of man. Man is the head of woman. He's establishing an order that's necessary, but not like you're lesser or you're not worth as much. But people can perceive that. So I'm going to tell you a little story. My beautiful wife surprised me for my 50th birthday with a sailboat trip. I think we've mentioned it before. I found out it was Christmas. My kids gave me some presents that looked like sailing presents. I was like, oh, that's nice. It's January, or, it's December. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these. Then I opened the present from her, and it was this Christmas. It was a sailing trip in the Caribbean, in the British Virgin Islands. And I was going with a couple of my buddies, Dave and Mark, and a buddy of mine from high school, my cousin, and my two boys, Matt and Alex. And I was like, wow, this is great. And I was like, yeah, this is great, And my wife says, you don't seem that excited. I'm like, well, I am, but, when is it? She's like, it's next week. I was like, she goes, look at the tickets. So I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, holy smokes. So I immediately, I don't know if I called Mark or Mark called me, because they all knew, and they're waiting me to find out so I could react, right? So I call Mark. I'm like, he goes, can you believe it? I'm like, no. I said, this is great. He goes, I'm so excited. I said, I know, me too. I go, where are we going? He goes, we're going sailing. I know, but where? He goes, well, British Virgin Islands. I'm like, okay, which islands? He goes, I don't know. I said, how long have you known about this? He goes, oh, I've known for months. I could barely keep it in. I'm like, and we don't have a plan? He's like, no. So then I think I talked to Dave. He's like, I don't know. And I'm talking to Matt. So I'm talking to everybody. I'm thinking, there's no plan. We're just going to the British Virgin Islands on a 45-foot boat. This is so exciting. What are we going to eat? So I call my cousin, or I start looking at, and there's, the whole bunch of islands, and they're like a big ring. I'm thinking, all right, where do you go? Where do you put the boat at night? Where do you eat? All these things that kind of, once the excitement of getting on the sailboat, you have to live, right? And so anyway, I call my cousin, Rich, and he's like, yeah, this is great. I'm so excited. I said, what are we going to do? He goes, I don't know. I'm thinking, holy smokes, nobody knows what they're doing. So I said, well, I'm going to I'll look up, try to make an itinerary, but I'll hope everybody's happy. I want to make sure they're having just as good a time as I am. It's their vacation as much as it is mine. I said, but I don't know. I said, and inwardly, the way I was brought up, or the way I was, is I always felt like you have to respect people who are older than you, right? There's a respect that's due. And I felt almost like I couldn't be telling other people what to do, especially Dave and Mark and my cousin Rich. There's a respect to it, and you just can't tell them this is what we're doing. I didn't feel comfortable. And so I was really conflicted. Here it is, the best thing that could happen to me, and I'm like in a knot. So my cousin Rich says to me, and here's the quote, he goes, "You're the captain." I said, well, I know I'm going to be doing sailing because I'm the only one that knows how to sail with all this whole crew. He goes, no, you're the captain. I'm like, yeah. He goes, no, you're the boss. That's it. Whatever you do it. You set it up. You tell everybody this is what we're doing. He goes, and then everybody they'll fall into place. And while I felt a little uneasy still, it gave me a peace that I'm like, okay, I'm the boss. Here's what we're doing. Fall in line. So I ended up making the itinerary. I figured out where we're going to buy food, how much we're going to need. I'm going to tell everybody chip in money, and then we'll all buy stuff together, and then we'll settle it up at the end. And, everybody was surprisingly, okay. Like, it fell into place. They just like, okay. And we had a great time. I don't think anybody didn't have a great time. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But my point was, no, Mark's laughing. So if God says you're the head, then you're the leader, then act like it. And, it talks about in the Bible about the leader will be the servant, right? I mean, I was the captain. I had to do all the work. I had to figure out where we're going, make sure we could figure out how much food we're going to have. And I don't cook, so we had to figure out, all right, who's cooking? Because we had to eat breakfast and lunch. We're going to do that on the boat. And then, so I had to say, okay, who's cooking which day, whatever. But everybody was fine with it. But, I was the boss. I also had to do all this stuff, So when you're the boss, it's not like you just get to sit and tell people what to do. You got to be the boss, right? You got to earn your spot. So let's go back to Scripture. 1 Corinthians 11:3. He goes, I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. So there's a peace that comes over a family, for example, when the man steps up and does his thing, because the woman could have issues with his leadership sometimes, but at least they can also find peace knowing someone's taking charge and they don't have to do it. Because there is a peace that comes from not having to do stuff. You know what I mean? Like someone else is making a decision. You might have comments about it. You might not like it, but at least there's a peace. There's a structure in place that there is peace in that. And like I said, just doesn't make people less or women less than men. And I have another quote. It's from Rush Limbaugh. I know that's not everybody's favorite, but he said once, he goes, never underestimate the intelligence of a woman who has convinced her husband he is smarter than her. I laugh at that all the time. Marianne always makes me think I'm smarter than her. So I've come up with some things that I think are good manly behavior. And basically, if you read Ephesians chapter 5, it's a pretty good start. So guys, I would read that, ladies too. But the first thing is clean speech. I know that the culture's gotten kind of coarse, and a lot of curse words are now considered adjectives rather than curse words. So I think men, especially during golf, you should keep your words pure. It said in Ephesians 5:4, it says there must be no filthiness or silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. Another item I think for men is being a good friend, being trustworthy and loyal. And the Bible, Proverbs 18:24 says, "A man of too many friends comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother." So often, people who don't have brothers or don't have brothers who are, acting like brothers, it's your close friend who's going to be that brother. Be a hard worker. Proverbs 10:4. It says, "Poor is he who works with a negligent hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich." Truthful. That's another one that I know a lot of people don't want to, you don't want to disappoint someone. You don't want to put up with the results of telling the truth, so people tell their little fibs or little lies or whatever. Being truthful is something that sets you apart. And I'll tell you a little story, not to brag about myself, because I don't always do this, but we were at Whole Foods last week up in Albany, and I tried to convince them to make me a breakfast sandwich because it was after 12, and they're like, nope. So we ended up with a hamburger. So I got a hamburger. We both got a hamburger. So I'm at the checkout line, and Mary Ann's hamburger had the price on it. Mine had $1 on it. And turns out it was like $1 was for the extra cheese, but it just said $1. So I put it up, and she rings it up for $1. I go, that's not right. She goes, what? I go, it's not $1. That was... She goes, oh, yeah, no, that's not $1. Oh, no. She rings it up right and whatever, right? She goes, boy, that was really nice of you to say. Not everybody would do that. Not everybody's that honest. I said, well, I think they are. They just really don't know it yet, Let's try to be kind, right? She goes, yeah, tell that to the person who stole our wheelchair last week. I'm thinking, oh, my God. They stole a wheelchair. So anyway, so there's two people that cashier could look as. This guy who actually, for $5 or $6 was being honest, and the guy who stole the wheelchair. But I think it made an impact on her, and I wasn't doing it to make, anyway. So, fathers, be the disciplinarian. I know this is hard sometimes. You may have disagreements with your wife about how to discipline or whatever, but somebody needs to be the boss. You're the boss. You got to be the one who sets the disciplinary role. You got to be the bad guy sometimes. But that's your job. In Ephesians 6:4 it says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord." Now, it says fathers there. Okay, it doesn't say parents, it doesn't say moms, it doesn't say those who care more than I, it just says fathers. So you got to take it as it's written. So step up. A couple others here. Being godly is in your life. do stuff that tries to please God. And if you're not sure what pleases God, read His book, read the Word, and find out. These are the things that day by day build you up and train you, and we all need training. Sexually pure. I know today's culture is a lot less, what's the word I'm looking for? Loose. It's up to the men to be the guard, right? You're the one that needs to set the standard, and it's probably harder for men because men have that thing called testosterone. So, and the other one is be considerate of others, but don't be a pushover. There's a difference there. And in Philippians 2:3 it says, "Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind regard one another as more important than yourselves." So being considerate is probably best said in that just be more think of others more important than yourself. I think another item I have here, which I think is very important, is to be a prayer warrior, to pray. You know, so many times you hear stories of the old grandmother who prayed for the family. I think it's so important that men are the ones who are praying for their family. Because not only are you in the position of authority in your house according to God, but you're also setting an example to your family and to your children that is going to go on for generations. And I'm not just saying, get on your knees and pray, but I'm saying pray out loud over your children so that they see a model that is set for them that's going to make a positive impact and against what the culture is showing us. So another one, I think my last point is here about defender of righteousness. Be ready to fight if need be for right. And I know it's not always politically correct to say you should fight, but I think sometimes you need to fight if you have to. I'm not saying, you got to be careful with that. But I want to go back to one of my favorite movies is Open Range. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. It's a Western with Robert Duvall and Kevin Costner. And there's a scene, they're in a bar, and they're talking to this guy. They saved his dog, so they kind of know him. They're kind of outsiders in this town or whatever. And the guy goes, "Shame what this town's come to." And Charlie, one of the outsiders, says, "Well, you could do something about it." And the guy goes, "What? We're freighters. Ralph, here's a shopkeeper." And Charlie says, "Well, you're a man, ain't you?" It was great. He goes, "You're a man, ain't you?" And the guy goes, "Well, I didn't raise my boys just to see them killed." Because the guy in town was a really bad guy. He really was. And Charlie goes, "Well, you may not know this, but there are things that gnaw at a man worse than dying." And I thought, it is Hollywood, whatever, but there are some truths there that there are things that can gnaw at you as a man worse than dying, right? So, go see that movie. I mean, the best part about the movie is they don't talk a lot. But when they talk, man, I mean, it's just the interaction between these two tough guys is so funny. So I want to read you some quotes now, or more quotes. And one is a couple from JFK. And John F. Kennedy was, he was a president. He got assassinated. There were many positive things about him, but there are also many negative qualities. I mean, the guy definitely had problems with morality and really, overshadowed his presidency, whatever. But you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? There are people who have flaws that for a lot of reasons you may have a problem with them, but there can be wisdom that comes from them. So one of them that I thought was really great, obviously very famous, he goes, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but rather what you can do for your country." And this was at his inauguration, right? Here he is, his first speech as president, and he's calling the country to action, to do something. Don't sit here and expect stuff from the government, but, what can you do? Don't ask what you can get, but what can you do? He was setting a standard. He was putting a call out. This is what men do. This is what leaders do. You set standards. You put the call out. This could be for yourself. It could be for your family. It could be for your friends. But think about it. Think about what standard you can set for yourself, what standard you can set for other people. The other one, I have a lot of quotes from Winston Churchill. Now, I think I talked about Winston Churchill before. He had many problems, right? He was probably an alcoholic. He was drunk a lot, I think. He was very abusive to people. I wrote here somewhat of a curmudgeon. I think that was being generous. But Winston Churchill followed Neville Chamberlain, who was kind of the prime minister before, who kind of appeased Hitler and the Nazis. And then Churchill came in and said, no, we're going to fight this. We're not going to accept this. And, he escalated the war with Britain and Germany. And at one point, London, it was called the London Blitz, 56 out of 57 days, the Germans bombed London. And they started in the daytime, and then the British Air Force fought, repelled them. So then they said, okay, we're coming at night. So think about going to bed every night and bombs falling and shaking and coming up the next morning and half your neighborhood is gone. I mean, when you look at pictures of the London Blitz, you'll see it was unbelievable. Every day, every day, every day, every day. 56 days. Think about what that would do to your psyche and the psyche of a nation. And people, Neville Chamberlain was saying, see, just tell them to stop, whatever it takes to stop, right? I mean, that's going to be that. Winston Churchill was saying, no, 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 we're going to fight, we're going to fight. So anyway, let me read some of his quotes. Because these are the things that get countries through difficult times, that get civilizations through difficult times. So here's the first one. If you're going through hell, keep going. Okay? Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. It says, you have enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something sometime in your life. This one I like the best. He goes, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Now we're allies, right? And he's still picking on him, but this one applies to me, maybe others. It says, I'm always ready to learn, although I do not always like being taught. In the course of my life, I have often had to eat my words, and I must confess that I've always found it a wholesome diet. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. So he was a guy that I think was very self-aware. And this is probably my favorite. He goes, there's always a strong case for doing nothing, especially for doing nothing yourself. And I think that a lot of times with men is an issue, that we might be very comfortable not doing anything when we should be doing something. So the question is, what do you do when things get tough, right? I mean, you want to set out, you want to be the man, you want to set the example, blah, blah, blah. What happens when things get tough? You just want to stop, you want to give up. I'm going to quote JFK again. He says, do not pray for an easy life. Pray to be a stronger man. And too many times I think nowadays when things get tough, you just pray, get me out of this. And here's a guy that kind of had read more of his story, because I think you see what he went through. That was his character. It wasn't just something he said. Now here's a quote from my friend Anthony Masasi. You just don't quit on it. I don't even think I got that right. It was kind of like, you just don't quit on it. And we were talking about, I work with him, and a lot of times when you're working on physical things never go right. And you just want to give up. You try something, you break something, you're using a wrench, whatever. You work, it's just not going, and you just feel like getting up and walking away. And I think I had one of those times. And Anthony's like, no, you just don't quit on it. And sure enough, every time I work with Anthony, something happens, and we stay on it, and we get it. So I just think it's a parallel in life. Things happen in life. Stay on it. Don't quit. And it will work out. And then the last quote, Winston Churchill. Never, never, never give up. So no matter what's going on in your life, unless you're doing something really stupid, then you should give up. But in general, never, never, never give up. So I want to tell you one more story, and then we'll end up here. We talked about the British Virgin Islands sailboat story. So it was funny. At the end of the week, Dave was sleeping on deck the whole week. We had 7 guys on board. It was kind of tight, and he was sleeping on the cushions on top, right? And he's finally, the last day, he's like, you know what? I got to sleep in a hotel tonight. So we ended up, we motored to this marina, and we literally slowed down, and Dave jumped off, and we threw his bags off while the boat was still going. Like, for different reasons. We weren't trying to get rid of him that badly. It was just too hard to dock. So anyway, we did that. So we go out. Dave's off on his little vacation from the vacation. So we're going out. We're sailing to this other island now, and it is an absolutely beautiful day. And like for the first time, I say, I'm laying on the deck. So I go and I lay on the deck in the sun. My cousin Richie's at the helm, the steering wheel. Matt and Alex are in the cockpit. Actually, all the other guys are in the cockpit. Matt and Alex just took out their leftovers from the night before the restaurant. Life couldn't be any better. And all of a sudden, I just look up, and ahead of us, like a half a mile, I see this rain cloud. And I said, I go like this, I say, Rich, we better watch out, watch that. That's not good. He goes, oh yeah, look to your left. And I look to my left, and I see this rain cloud like 100 yards away. And I'm just about to get up, and the boat, now this boat is 45 feet long. It displaces 25,000 pounds, and probably a third of that is in the keel to keep the boat upright, right? This boat goes like this, wow, like almost level to the water. And Matt and Alex are like, their food, the ziti's all over the deck. And all I hear is like, hum, 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 everybody's knocked over. And I assess the situation. I say to Rich, start the motor, turn into the wind. And he'd already been bending down to start the motor, and he had the wheel over, and the boat won't go. And it's the wind's blowing it over like this. And I'm like, and I realized the front sail, which is fully engaged in the wind, is keeping the boat from turning. I said, okay, we got to let loose those lines. So we're like trying to get over there, and we're not falling in the water, and the lines are really, really tight because the wind is in there. We finally, Matt and I pull it, get the line out, so the sail goes, The boat goes into the wind, so now it's straight up and down. The wind and the rain are whipping on us, and this front sail's whipping all over, so we're trying to reel them in. So all this happens in like 30 seconds. Everybody goes downstairs, and I'm sitting in the back of the boat now with my cousin Rich, or we're at the thing, and we actually got our hands on the stays. These are these metal lines that hold the mast up. So we both got our hands on the stays, and all of a sudden we see flashes. And I'm thinking, oh my God, lightning. And we both look at each other like, take our hands off these metal things. And it turns out it was Mark in the boat below taking photos of us with the light. Anyway, the point of that whole story was that is when I became the captain. Because I knew what I had to do without thinking about it, which I'm not going to say saved our lives because, it wasn't that. It seemed very dramatic at the time, but it wasn't. But it was definitely scary. But I knew what to do because I actually started sailing in a sailboat in college, and it was like a 10-foot dinghy, right? So I had done little things throughout my life that trained me that when the crap hit the fan, I knew what to do instinctively, and I took control and I made things right. So my point of that story is men need to do these things. They need to practice the things that are righteous and seek God's face each day so that when that time comes, when the storm comes and knocks your ship over, that you will know what to do, and everyone else will be protected and have peace and be saved from that situation because of you. So you have the DNA. We're made in God's image. You are the captain. You got to start acting like it. And there's always a strong case for doing nothing. But you got to overcome that. That's it.